So good afternoon and welcome everyone. Apologies for the delay. I forgot to click one button. So both Pete and Charlotte and I were talking and chatting and waiting for people to join. But that was just me keeping you all in the waiting room. So apologies for that. Welcome to this Fleet Forum webinar. We are here today with Pete Scott and Charlotte Porter from Microlise. And they will be talking about monitoring and reporting on your emission data. Feel free to use the chat to introduce yourself, to let us know where you're from, which organization you work for. And you can also ask questions. You can either do that in the chat or you can use the Q&A button you see in the screen. So we can pick that up at the end of the webinar. We'll have some time to address your questions. So without any further ado, I will mute my camera, I will mute my mic, and I will leave it to Pete and Charlotte.
Okay, guys, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. This is going to be a very quick run through of quite a big topic, and it's quite en vogue, clearly. For those of you who know me, hello. Those that you don't, I'm Pete Scott. I head up Microlise's Defence Security and NGO and Humanitarian Aid business. Charlotte Porter is joining me today. She's one of our product managers, manages our Amber product and our HUMS and Advanced Service Enablement part of the business from a product perspective. If you just click on Charlotte. This is what we're going to be covering today. It's a commercial transport view of emissions, capturing data, etc. in this space. Microlise predominantly works in the transport and logistics space. For those of you who don't know us, we provide telematics and logistics solutions across the globe for many different organisations. And most recently, some of you will be aware that we are working with the United Nations now. But we won't go into any further detail on that. So this will be a quick run through of what's happening in the commercial marketplace. And what we want you to keep and bear in mind throughout this is that some of this is quite advanced, and clearly your environment and your thinking will be slightly different. But what we hope by the end is that you'll understand where we're going, what our markets outside of this space are doing, and hopefully take some lessons learned forward into your own ecosystems. And without further ado, I'll pass on to the main event, who is Charlotte.
Thanks, Pete. So we'll start with looking at monitoring and reporting your emissions data. So we all have a responsibility to reduce our emissions and ensure that we are working in sustainable business practice. With the introduction of more advanced and viable alternatively fueled vehicles in the commercial market, there's growing interest now in how aid agencies can improve their emissions and reduce their carbon footprint. In 2021, the UN reported using 310 million litres of fuel to run their vehicle fleet, generators and boilers. And while some of this is unavoidable at this stage, there's clearly significant room for improvement and efficiency gains so that we can reduce our dependency on fossil fuels. The Fleet Forum community is already engaged in this and have done some emissions baselining and signed commitments to improve sustainable transport operations. So we're here today to see how learning from the commercial vehicle sector can be applied to the Fleet Forum community and its unique operational challenges. The recent COP28 summit highlighted the need to raise ambition and to seek solutions to overcome these barriers. So today's presentation will look at the measure, reduce and offset approach and how fleet data supports this whole process. In many aid and development agencies, there's a growing interest for sustainable fleet management. Going electric is a sure way to reduce fleet emissions, but we know that transitioning to electric vehicles or alternatives such as gas requires substantial investment into the fleet and infrastructure, and fleet operators may be unsure whether they're suitable for their operational requirements. So it's all about ensuring that we get the right vehicle on the right job, and fleet data is key to assessing which step forward is the right one for you. Therefore, we also need to have a look at what we can do with our current fleet mix. And this may include internal combustion engine vehicles, hybrids, gas vehicles, even retrofits. So we need to recognise that the transition to zero emission transportation, for many operators, they now need to learn how to manage a fleet full of mixed fuel types. and the unique operational implications that this may have. For many, this will be a new way of working. There are various ways to improve sustainability of our current fleet mix, from training drivers on eco-driving style techniques to making more advanced smart routing decisions to avoid unnecessary mileage, fitting aerodynamic air deflectors, reducing idling, and ensuring that the right type of vehicle is selected for the right job. To measure the effectiveness of these changes, emissions reporting is essential, and it can help us to identify where the greatest gains are in trials, which can then be rolled out to the fleet as a whole. Data is the key to unlocking these gains, and it's fundamental to the measure, reduce, and offset approach, which we'll have a look at now. So the first step is measure. We need to know what the current fleet emissions are as is. This data can be derived through telematics tracking units and live activity data. On a basic level, some emission data can be derived from vehicle characteristics and standard emission figures that have been reported by OEMs through the vehicle model and make. On a more advanced level, we can pull data about live operational performance and take into account things like trailer load, driving style, and improve the accuracy of the data that we're pulling through. As the data accuracy improves, this means that we can get more advanced asset management information into systems such as Microlise. By measuring emissions, we can monitor the baseline, track trends, measure the impact of attempts to reduce emissions. By knowing how much we emit in a journey or over the span of a month, we can inform the next phase of the process, reduce. The fleet forum community realistically is going to be somewhere in the middle between the basics and advanced. We're on that transition, and the good news is that we can make great step forwards. The next step is for the fleet to invest in data-driven services. So we know what the baseline is. Now, what can we do to reduce emissions? Data-driven services can provide insights into fleet operators and proactively suggest improvement methods such as driver-style coaching within a system or even directly within the cab to the driver. In the logistics and transport office, insights can suggest which vehicle is best allocated to a journey based on the vehicle profile and known load and weight and size. Insights can even help operators to identify regular routes where an alternatively fueled vehicle could be suitable. Here we can see on the screen an example of a European low emission zone. The operator can make an informed decision about vehicle routing into the low emission zone and whether the vehicle's emissions are compatible or not. This isn't about making operations impossible and restricting what a fleet is capable of, but it's about empowering the fleet manager so that the information and the data is at their fingertips to make the right decision at the right time, balancing the environmental impact of their operation alongside the need to deliver the goods on the vehicle. Having measured and reduced emissions, data can inform offset options. In some cases, at this moment in time, internal combustion engine vehicles are a necessary part of operations, and we accept that in the commercial vehicle sector and even more so in aid agencies. This can be due to the terrain, the location, the level of infrastructure that has been rolled out within a country or a specific town, the cost of implementation, and the operational suitability of electric or gas vehicles. Therefore, some organisations might opt to offset their emissions to reach carbon neutrality. The total fleet emission data captured will inform the number of carbon offset credits required, so we need this data first at our fingertips in order to inform what we offset. Carbon offsets are just one piece of the emissions reduction puzzle, and they're not a silver bullet. We know that they're flawed, but they may be necessary right now. The diagram you can see on screen by Wood Mackenzie illustrates the steps that we encourage operators to adopt. Avoid unnecessary emissions through operational improvements, which is identified through fleet data via asset management systems like Microlise. Use data services to improve the efficiency of the current process, such as data-driven journey management suggestions. And then leverage new technologies such as battery electric vehicles retrofit options, and invest in asset management systems that facilitate emission reduction. Data can inform where new technologies are suitable. We recognise that there is no perfect, all-encompassing solution that enables zero-emission operation without any operational impact. So we must embrace the imperfection and do what we can, and then compensate the gap through carbon offset options which are available. High quality and accurate fleet data is fundamental to this monitor, reduce and offset approach. We need to know that changes that we make are having a positive impact and work towards ambitious goal by tracking trends. The starting point, as we see on screen, is landing the data, whether this is from a truck, a car, a generator, whether these are electric, gas or diesel driven. We then assess the efficiency gains that can be made with the current fleet mix and their compatibility with location-specific emissions legislation or restrictions. And we thus then track changes. The emissions gains are evidenced by the data, and we can track trends towards a specific goal that is set within the organisation. This can then be used to inform the suitability of future asset purchasing decisions, as well as being evidence for requests for grants or incentives, and prove that an organisation is actively working towards zero emissions. The commercial vehicle sector has shown us the challenges that we face here as they start to adopt more battery electric vehicles, but also the huge gains available, not only environmentally, but also improving driver safety, satisfaction, and driver health. We know that the Fleet Forum community are committed to this journey and are interested to see how we continue to raise the ambition. We all have a responsibility to reduce our emissions and impact on the environment to ensure sustainable business practice. And data insights are here to enable you to make the right decisions along the way. So as we've said, this has been a high-level quick touch upon an extremely complex topic, but we hope to continue to work to pull learnings from the commercial vehicle sector into the Fleet Forum community and support. I'll now take a look to see if we have any questions, and Pete and I can talk those through. Thank you.
Thanks, Charlotte. Let's see if there's any questions. I don't see any questions so far. I see. Yes, I see Simon from OSCE. He says, we are working on a simple scope 1 baseline, scope 1 emissions baseline. And do you have any tips on assessing scope 2 or 3?
Yeah, so this will be the transition into the more advanced analytics. So it'd be interesting to hear the level of granularity that we're getting in the scope 1 baseline. As we're supporting commercial vehicle operators into assessing their environmental reporting and tracking trends, we have seen that at first it can be quite overwhelming in understanding what to track and where the biggest efficiency gains are. So just as we suggest with implementing driver training improvements, we always suggest starting small. So limit the parameters that you're tracking at first, perhaps down to NOx, CO2, and then build on from there.
I think also we did a project with Fleet Forum a couple of years back on data analytics, and I think even with the very basic baseline, you know, using things like Excel, a lot of mandrolic processes that some of you face, you know, then sending that on to or investing in perhaps a proper data analytics consultant or someone like that, they can actually do a huge amount with the data, even in its basic form, to parse it, to put it into some sort of structured format and apply some of the tools to start looking at those baselines and those trends already. That would be a hugely valuable and efficient way of using your time and limited resource, one would imagine. I don't think, you know, I think what Charlotte said and what we'd want to stress is investment in data. Clearly we are data providers, so we would say that, but investment in timely and accurate data is absolutely crucial to this whole process. And that time and that money spent at the beginning of the process will inform the success of any of these operations throughout.
Okay, thanks. Maybe as a follow-up question, because we know that a lot of the Fleet Forum members are at the start of the journey by getting a baseline, starting to get data, and usually focusing initially on scope 1. From the commercial sector, do you have any good practices how they started to look at, for example, scope 3, how they looked at the emissions of their subcontractors, how they included that in already when they selected subcontractors? Anything to share there?
From my world in the sort of government space, that's certainly being applied to tender processes, that we're having to demonstrate our compliance with governmental policy on reducing emissions, and we're having to demonstrate our green credentials furthermore. So in terms of tips on how to monitor it, that whole supply chain monitoring throughout, we've just been through a very, very large tender process with obviously one of the member organizations. And again, within that, we were informed of how we to do it. I guess my point being is that we have to collectively build that into all of our processes. It has to be something that we report on, and we have to hold our supply chains to account. That's a really simple thing to say, but more challenging to actually do, because you've got to put the time and resource into monitoring what people are doing. And that needs to be led from the top, and each government, each organization is going to have its own way of doing that, and some will be better than others. The United Nations, in our limited experience so far, are very robust on that, and rightly so. They need to be the world leaders in that, and I think we all follow on behind that. And business, as there will be members of business organizations on this call, I'm sure, we march to the coin a lot of the time, and if we're told to do it, and that's what we have to do business, then we'll do it. If we're not forced into that space, then I don't think there'll ever really be that sort of change that we need. And it's organizations and forums such as this that are going to apply that pressure. But I think, I'm preaching to the converted here. We're all on the same page. That's what we're all striving to do. So I think just keep applying pressure to your supply chains and force the people that are providing new services to show their green credentials and to help you along that way. And obviously buy more telematics. That's what I say.
Thanks, Pete. Looking at, I see a question from Sam, who is asking, have you any challenges with bringing all colleagues on board with the changes? If so, how have you dealt with it? So maybe Sam, that's maybe also a nice question for everybody in the webinar, to sort of share your experiences in the chat, so we can sort of build on that in answering this question. But what are the types of challenges that people might have bringing colleagues on board with the need to use data in order to reduce your emissions and to have a more sustainable fleet?
I mean, it is a complete change in business practice when we look at some of the more traditional customers. We've gone from business requirements being how quickly can we get a vehicle out on the road, how quickly can we deliver something, how can we be most efficient in getting the most weight on a vehicle, that kind of thing, to all of a sudden having this additional consideration around emissions, which, in some cases can contradict then with the needs for speed or last minute deliveries and that kind of thing. So it is a different way of thinking. I think everyone's aware that we have this responsibility to reduce that impact on the environment and to move towards sustainable business practice. The key here to unlocking any sort of hesitancy or resistance from individuals, I think, here is about recognizing that there is no perfect solution. So we have to do what we can And there will always be the pitfalls, but we make one step at a time. I think when the data comes into play and we are looking at these emissions tracking, like I say, this is a new addition to standard business practice. It's going to be new. It's additional time within the business to track this, to implement changes. It's going to be new style attempts at driver training, which are not now all focused around cost savings. It's focused around emissions, which of course in some cases can come hand in hand with fuel savings. But it is that reset and recognition that there are going to be contradictions. If we look to the far end, when we look at bringing alternatively fueled vehicles into a fleet, that comes with its whole new host of operational challenges around their different maintenance and servicing needs. There needs to be out on the road or back at base for a certain length of time, that kind of thing. And it is just that change of being a transport manager now looks different. It is going to be a lot more data driven, and the challenge of managing mixed fleets, which will exist for the next couple of decades, is going to be a different way of working.
There's a couple of key challenges in the commercial market that our customers in that space face, and none more so than profit margins. Commercial transport and logistics is a low margin, highly competitive market. So to add anything that's going to eat away at margins is a challenge for us to face. The challenge for us is to help our customers in that space do this without in the most efficient way possible, and selling, as Charlotte's just mentioned there, the upsell opportunity of, if you go to this, you will make savings elsewhere. That's one of the key sort of ROI considerations. And dare I say, the other challenge is generational. I think with the younger generation, probably a bit younger than me, this is bread and butter. This is absolutely what we should be doing, and everybody understands that. And actually, that consideration isn't necessarily appreciated initially, but bigger organizations are starting to realize that to get the best people into their businesses as a workforce, they've got to demonstrate their own credentials in the more in the environmental space, because that's what's driving younger generations to join these companies. And I would recommend the study commissioned by Deutsche Bank and participated in by a number of German and Scandinavian countries, looking at the future workforces and what drives people and their motivation. And it's not all about money anymore. So that is certainly something that we're seeing as well, that younger generations are far more appreciative of that. In terms of internally within our own business, there are, and in the UK we have government-led schemes that encourage people through tax incentivization to use greener vehicles. So that again is a way that we are as a business trying to contribute to this space. And again, those incentivizations are absolutely critical to this as well as business. Again, this is all from the commercial market perspective. Your considerations and challenges are clearly slightly different and no less important.
No, thanks, Pete, Beth, and Charlotte for your thoughts. And I think even though the markets might be different and the sectors might be different, there is also, there are also overlap or resemblance between the sector also, where we see from Fleet Forum that there is a change in the profile of a fleet manager, where 10 years ago it might be much more technical or mechanical knowledge. Now we also see that due to the need for data and data-driven decision making, that the profile of fleet managers also is changing. So I think that there is, even though it's not the same completely, but there is overlap, and there is things that are similar. We have another question from Mohammedin, who is asking, I think the main challenge is the absence of data analysis structure and expertise in much of the organizations. How can you initiate this by engaging member organizations?
Yeah, I think I mentioned this before. Yeah, we absolutely we saw this. It was with a couple of organisations. I forget who we worked with, whereas I can't remember if you do. But it was old data capture through Excel spreadsheets. We are fortunate enough to have our own data science team, and a very good one, and they are, I mean, I don't understand what they're talking about half the time, but employing consultants or data analytics specialists could be one way that you do that, and there are a myriad of them out there, and like I said, I can't stress how important I think that is at the beginning, getting that right. In your future procurements, you know, there are database structures and there are systems now that that really can make that whole process very easy for relatively low costs compared to what they used to be in the past. Data lakes and analytics tools are all out there, and a lot of them are very user friendly. I know that some of the organizations on this call use companies like Palantir and Power BI and, you know, and all these cloud platforms, you know, huge expensive beasts, but there are cheaper and easier alternatives designed specifically for smaller organizations. I think also some of the work that Rose and the team do at Fleet Forum is absolutely crucial. This is a forum in which we can do some stuff without it costing you anything. You know, that example I give from a couple of years ago was such an exercise. I think you've got to just prepare yourself to, if you haven't got the internal expertise, you've got to outsource that. I think this is too important a subject not to invest some capital in, you know, and then use forums such as this to try and do some low level and start that process at least. Charlotte, you got any more on that one?
Yeah, I think you can make data-driven choices as well without having, you know, in the day-to-day, without necessarily having that, you know, data analyst role in, you know, deeply ingrained in the day-to-day operation. So if it can have a rebrand basically, so it's not scary. So things like implementing eco-style driving behaviour training into the driver's fleet, for example, that can be data driven, and we can be tracking the impact that it has day to day on our total emissions. And that's a form of using data to reach these sustainability targets. But it doesn't need to be branded to the driver trainers and the driver coaches as this big data science exercise. So we can build this into the standard transport operations more subtly and sort of in a way that's more easy to accept into the day-to-day. Yes, behind it we're doing this huge amount of analysis perhaps, and we're having a look at the impact and we're tracking trends, but it can be made more digestible, I think, to everyone within the organisation.
And the sharing of data as well, and sharing of information. You know, that's another key thing. One of the things we do is we're fortunate, we got 600,000 connections across the world, and we have all of our data gets anonymized and put into our data lake, and we're able to draw the lessons learned from across and make recommendations out. So companies like Microlise, there will be others that probably do something similar. You know, you're able to take all of those and suggest lessons learned and advise throughout that. But again, using forums like this, share that information, take part in the baselining activities that Rose is organising, you know, the new green coaching app. And whilst I've majored on the importance of accurate data at the start of the process, don't let perfection stop progress. I think, you know, that old adage, you know, you can do a lot with some very basic stuff. We can make some assumptions. You know, if you've not got CAN enabled vehicles with accurate OEM data, we can still do some pretty clever stuff collectively, you know, with just some simple maths, you know, time distance calculations, and, you know, pick something that makes sense in terms of an emissions calculation, for example, you know, and make it with that. So, you know, there's a definite balance here. We're giving you probably the most advanced things we can do. The opposite end of the spectrum is to keep on doing what you're doing, but with maybe a little bit of intelligent guesswork for want of a better phrase. That will be a start. There's your start, your baseline.
Okay, thanks, Pete. And I think that's a great great comment to end with. Don't wait for perfect, but start and make sure that that you are able to measure the things that you're doing, and then in the months, years to come, improve on it. So thanks a lot for that. We are 30 minutes later, so first thanks to Pete and Charlotte to share their thoughts and ideas around around data and how it can help you to reduce emissions and to take some examples from the commercial sector. Thanks a lot for that. Thanks to all of you in the webinar. We hope to see you next week for our last webinar of 2023. And we will share the recording of this webinar with you later today. So thanks a lot and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Sorry, Simon.